Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics at New America Christian University. And this is just a brief, informal check-in for week one, or rather in response to our video questions from week one of COM 4103, Special Topics in Media Studies. Our special topics emphasis this course is Mythic Media in America. And we have flipped the table in this course, asking students to generate a video discussion questions each week, as they've perhaps many have written discussion questions in response to readings in previous courses. And so this gives us an opportunity to polish that formal question writing, question asking exercise, not unlike what we do in creating social media presence and cultural movements. Anyway, want to respond briefly and informally, perhaps in a fragmented manner, into some of your videos. I wanted to build giant videos to all of them, but what I found was we were having so much discursive action on the message boards, in the discussion sections of D2L, that it was funneling a ton of that creative energy, that intellectual energy. And so this is a tribute to your work, the work of our students in the course, doing an excellent job stimulating, being active, posting early. I think we've demonstrated that the earlier we get engaged each week, the better the conversation goes. The more we are creating or co-creating knowledge together, learning through talking, doing, thinking, processing. In response to your video questions, and I've watched each of them at least 2 to 3 times a piece, but starting as far back as on Friday, and then over the weekend into Monday, and here we are a few days in advance of that. So somewhat rusty. I remember the general gist, but I just wanted to remark on these. I didn't want to leave the conversation entirely. I know we will have new conversations to come, but allow me to kind of just piggyback off of the work you all are doing. John was asking about, he was remarking and responding to the Lawrence and Jewett text. I'm glad you did. If I was going to speculate, I thought this is the kind of text that could speak to a John, right? And I hope you're enjoying it as well as everyone else. I think there's some incredible information in here. They're doing some fun theoretical cultural work, all right? And it's coming from a theological place as well simultaneously. And so they bring a fresh perspective on cultural criticism, this tandem, and we basically just get a taste in week one. We're reading the introduction, and that's intentional, okay? So what we want you to understand is we pick up speed in week 2 especially, and then collectively we tackle a lot of ground in week 4, but we will individually have our sections that we're looking closest at. But in week 1, it's all about processing that introduction. And I've said this before, but it is easy, especially early on, especially at maybe an undergraduate level of working through course after course after course, to approach a book and you look at it, you break it down immediately, and the first thing you want to say to yourself is, okay, introduction, don't need it, skip it, let's get to chapter 1, okay, let's get this thing going. Makes sense. Most novels function that way. But really, academic writing is different from fiction, and the introduction is pivotal. It frames the book, especially more complex theoretical works. Reading the introduction lays out the framework, so we don't have to read it with a bunch of guesswork, like what are they talking about, where are they going. A great introduction will set all of that up for us. And so a relatively brief introduction in the Myth of the American Superhero, and John picked up on, I knew I needed to mark it, one of my favorite passages out of the introduction of this book. This is a book that I can look back to at different times and find some outstanding inspiration, just in terms of thoughtful writing, but also deep cultural analysis. and it has to do with the link that these authors are making between the cultural work that heroes and superheroes are doing, and how they might be these sort of secular stand-ins or secular replacements for traditional traditional belief systems, religious belief systems, and then that sort of directionality. And that is awesome to consider. I hope these conversations blossom. Don't ever feel like we can't go back in time. I think we have a small enough class and enough focus that if you all are wrestling with ideas as we go through weeks, bring us back. Come back to that original text. Let's talk about it. John mentions a question also relating to Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, which we're also reading in conversation here. He commented on, as someone familiar with the Christopher Nolan movies, the pop-up of Harvey Dent, right? This sort of referential character work, and that phenomenon you're identifying. We can tie this back to a term, not his term, but a term we get defined for us in Marcel Danisi's Popular Culture Introductory Perspectives, and perhaps even Berger's work, intertextuality, right? These are intertextual references. They're references within a body of a work, so it can be exciting to get it, right? To make the connections ourselves. This is why one of the reasons the Marvel movies became so successful was people were appreciating finally a movie that was telling its own story but dropping these breadcrumbs, or what the industry calls Easter eggs, okay, to lay the groundwork for future characters, stories, sequels, spin-offs, and so on. And the world of superhero comic book continuity, key term there, is all about understanding that these are fictional characters occupying a shared universe, like we see in the movies, of course, and then when they interact with one another, it's doing this interesting literary type work, okay? So you're getting these exchanges, and it's a fun feeling. And what I wanted to identify to add to that conversation John started was that that intertextuality is a highly valuable aesthetic, all right? And it shows the dexterity of a given text. I didn't bring it in with me, but I'll send a snapshot to the Remind group post, and hopefully I'm not flooding us with too much information there, but I like the idea of it being an active space. But on one of the recommendations, if a person is like, John, this is pure guesswork, and they're digging the character of Harvey Dent or the alter ego of Two-Face, I would recommend, and this is a great initial read for entry level, for novice level comic book readers, Jeff Loeb's Batman The Long Halloween. Okay, The Long Halloween. It's collected in graphic novel form. It's one of the most highly praised works, along with The Dark Knight Returns. It's a 12-issue miniseries that's retelling some origins somewhat. It's a bit of a murder mystery. Okay, so there's that. It's got that going for it, and then the character of Harvey Dent definitely plays one of those strong supporting roles. So if you're Harvey Dent or Two-Face, if you're a fan of that character, give that text a try. And yes, when Jewett and Lawrence are talking about these super saviors, I think that's where we can make that connectivity between, they're talking about American myths. They're not limiting it at all to comics. But what we are getting, on the other hand, from Chris Gavler is a cultural history of a medium in progress that's building up and talking about myth making in America as well. And so we will see these indirect connections between these two texts, some synergy happening, especially in week 2. Very exciting stuff there. Chris was commenting on comics and Batman, calling it a new experience. Okay, so, and we love this, a new experience reading comic books. And one of the key points Chris made was a recognition that was not anticipating it would be this dark, or it's darker than he thought it would be. And so I like this commentary of just of darkness, of darker themes, and this is very much part and partial for Frank Miller, the writer. Okay, a lot of his works skew toward that mature label. Okay, he often writes very what's now referred to as grim and gritty style. Noir is a big entrenchment for Frank Miller, and Sin City, if you've heard of that movie, or it was based on comic books, graphic novels rather. Sin City is a very mature rated noir, and Miller has many other works like that push those kinds of boundaries within a graphic medium. Don't Let's go ahead and have this conversation. Frank Miller, also author of 300, standalone graphic novel, of course, very loosely based and interpreted from Greek history, translated, adapted to through the film of the same name, right? That was quite popular for a number of years. I don't know if it holds up the same way, but that is absolutely a text about myth and myth making. And here we see Miller playing with that sandbox again, using the Batman tools at his disposal. Chris mentioned that the order of comics can at times be confusing. I would add disorienting, and so I would agree with that and say that comics represent a different medium with its own rules. All right, Aaron gave some excellent advice for how to follow through that, and we tried to create a dialogue there on the message space. But just take it and absorb it, and it's a process, right? Learning to read, and it's a rhythm. And sometimes different graphic novels, different comic books are putting information out there and in different speeds, in different ways, and so it can be challenging, but it's a rewarding kind of challenge. So keep it up there. But this also speaks to the criticism of comics as perhaps being insular, right? As something that's hard to penetrate for the common person, the outside reader. And I think it's fair to critique the medium at times when necessary. Aaron was drawn to the Werther effect and was tying that socially to suicide, and we saw a recent blip, like a celebrity uptick, a few celebrity suicides, that sort of thing, as well as some shows that give it more attention. And I think that highlights the value of what these texts can do for us, as they allow us to process these concepts, these ideas. You mentioned, when you were talking about cosplay and then mentioning how Watchmen performs something like that, it got me thinking about cosplay vigilantes and your reference of celebrity stalkers and cosplay, intertwining of celebrity stalker and cosplay vigilantes. This is a foreshadowing for an early scene that we will see in The Dark Knight, Nolan's film. So keep an eye out for that. There's more on the MCI. People, I'm glad you all are drawn to that. It's an important conversation. We just probably won't have time for it in this video right now, but I want to expound on it as we get deeper into the book. And then, I think that intersection of MCI and religiosity, religious concepts and conceits are important for us to consider in conversation. And Megan was also tapping in to talking about the collective unconscious versus our singular brains. And I would say, like Megan, this brought some relief, right, to read that perspective. When we think of Campbell, we're thinking of Joseph Campbell, and we read a little bit about or from him in weeks kind of 1-2-ish. He's interested in the monomyth, whereas Jewett and Lawrence piggyback off of the monomyth to talk about the American monomyth. All right, so they're adding to that theoretical conversation. And the monomyth draws from Jung, right? Carl Jung, and this idea of the collective unconscious. But I think the more practical way to go about it is what Gavler presents in MCI, because what we're seeing is it's less about a collective unconscious that's building mythology, as opposed to the formative nature of how our brains collectively function. All right, so that's a teaser and a response to you all. This is exciting course so far. Plenty more to come. We're just getting started. Thank you for listening.